Robin, thank you for joining us in studio and taking time to discuss your time as ambassador to South Africa in a very interesting period of history.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Robin, before we start talking about that specific period, you also spent some time in what was then Rhodesia.
Yes.
Covering and also a very important event. Can you take us through your experiences there?
When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, Rhodesia was one of our most difficult problems, and I was the head of the Rhodesia department in the Foreign Office at the time, and she wanted a plan to deal with this crisis. What she was expecting from the Foreign Office was nothing much and rather wishy-washy. But we knew that's what she would expect. So instead, we served her up a very sort of adventurous plan, actually, which consisted of saying that, we've been blamed for this situation over which we have no control. We're told, you're the colonial power, do something about it. We don't actually run the country. We have very little influence. Therefore, this crisis has reached a point at which we really need to consider just intervening ourselves and actually taking charge and organizing, running the country for a while, organizing elections, declaring, the winners, and then handing over like we did in every other country. Now, this was a very, risky plan in many ways, and it was certainly quite a bold plan, and that's exactly what she liked about it. She had a sort of gambling instinct, and we persuaded the Rhodesians who were on the B-mans anyway that they'd better hand over to us. We sent a governor there, and I went with him. We had a very difficult negotiation at Lancaster House because there were two people there who didn't want an agreement. One was Ian Smith, so we had to outmaneuver him, and the other was Robert Mugabe. So Mugabe really wanted the war to go on, until the bitter end, and then, end up with him in charge. And he kept telling me at Lancaster House, power comes from the barrel of a gun. And I have a PhD in terrorism. And I used to say to him, yes, and General Walls has an army, and, with tanks and aircraft, and you're not going to win any time soon. I mean, you may very well win in the end, but you will inherit a country in absolute ruins.
If I may interject you there, of course in 1980 we ended up with an election which Robert Mugabe eventually won.
Yeah.
And for a long time that solution was widely celebrated.
Yes.
As a first of its kind in post-colonial South Africa.
Yes, it was. But the only reason Mugabe agreed to the settlement was because we persuaded President Machel to tell him that he either signed this agreement or no more support from Mozambique. So he was a reluctant participant at that time. But then, after the election, he asked us to stay on for a while to help him, get organized, and, he appointed the former finance minister as his finance minister and the head of the Commercial Farmers Union as the Minister of Agriculture to start progressive land reform. There was then a very nasty episode in Matabeleland, where he used the sort of 5th Brigade to crush Nkomo's forces. But otherwise, he governed relatively moderately for nearly 2 decades. But as soon as his hold on power was threatened, as soon as he lost the referendum on a new constitution and clearly was going to lose the 1982 elections, he started the new Chimurenga. And the new Chimurenga was modelled on the old one. I mean, the old one, if there was a village headman who was not cooperating with ZANU, at night he would be taken out and killed in front of the villagers and so on, and this went on. And, at around that time, I had a meeting with Nelson Mandela. He was no longer president at the time, but Mandela was a great upholder of the rule of law, and he also detested Mugabe, who he referred to derisively as Comrade Bob. And he told me, if that started here, I would come out of retirement and stop it on the first farm, because the land transfers must take place, but it has to be done legally.